Welcome to the Breakthrough Success Podcast, helping you achieve that breakthrough you've always been looking for in your business. And now your host, Mark Guberti.
Hello and welcome. I am your host, Mark Guberti, and this is the podcast for marketers and small business owners who are looking for the breakthrough for their businesses. I am very excited about this show. We are going to talk about personal development and entrepreneurship with Ivy, LaClair and Blake Brandes. Ivy and Blake are the co-founders of Motivational Millennial and co-host a podcast under the same name. Ivy is a personal transformation coach, and Blake is an international keynote speaker with a TEDx under his belt. The co-founders are passionate about helping other people, especially millennials, live fulfilling lives. And now, it is my pleasure to welcome the duo to the show.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad to be here.
It's a pleasure to be here, and your energy is so infectious, man.
It's amazing.
Thank you both for taking the time to stop by. This is actually my first podcast episode where I've ever interviewed two people. I'm happy to have made it for this occasion. But before we dive deep into personal development, I want to start off with the why question. So for the two of you, why did you start Motivational Millennial?
So this is a pretty funny story. A few years back, I moved out to Berkeley to work with Blake on building his motivational speaking brand for K through 12 schools. And we were working on that. And we were like hardworking people, straight A students kind of personality. So we started on this journey and we were giving it our all. And it was a whole year we'd been just grinding. And we were like, why are we not millionaires yet? What is happening? Why is this taking so long? And we took some internal game inventory, and we thought about all of the messaging that we received growing up as millennials, and that you can do anything and you can be anything that you want and dream big. And somewhere in that is this subconscious or underlying message that's all you have to do is want that thing and then it's going to happen, and it just makes it seem so much easier. There was so much protection from failure and all of these other factors that affected us in terms of grit and perseverance and all of these things. And we were like, there's no way we're the only millennials who are really wanting to pursue their dreams, pursue their passions, and are experiencing some disappointment actually in terms of why are we not famous now, already. So that's how it started. We really began with the podcast, which launched a year ago. And the reason that we created the podcast where we do interviews with millennials is because we wanted to highlight those folks who are really living their path of fulfillment with a sense of purpose, and also so that they can share, one, that it's possible, but that two, it's not as easy as you think, but that's okay, right? There are going to be challenges. There's going to be ups and downs, but that doesn't mean, this isn't the right path for you, or that you have to give up on your dream and your passion just because it's hard. And since then we've grown and we started doing workshops and speaking and all kinds of things. Oh, and coaching. It's just so inherent to me. I coach now that I forgot. Also coaching.
Thank you for sharing with us the story of how Motivational Millennial came to be. We'll definitely talk about rough patches later, because I feel like everyone's thinking, why can't I be a millionaire yet? Because I'm working so hard. But just before we do that, I feel like there are a lot of people who are trying to help millennials now, and I believe it's a great cause. But I also want to give you the opportunity to say what differentiates you from other people who are also trying to help millennials out.
Great question. I think a lot of people approach millennials from the perspective of, how do we fix these millennials? How do we get these entitled people who are always on their phones and expect a promotion 6 months into the job, and they want the company car and everything. And so we looked at that, and we really took the perspective that millennials are already enough, and they have everything within them that they need to be successful from an internal perspective. Certainly there are skills or training that can help develop certain tactical and strategic abilities, but really as people, we believe that millennials can live a life that's filled with passion and fulfillment. And also we believe that it's on them to do it. They are strong enough and capable enough to do that, and they don't need to have it all done for them, because I think a lot of the parenting during our upbringing was focused around protecting us from failure, protecting us from disappointment. And that was really good intentioned. And I think many of us who had that experience are grateful for it. But what it did create, as Ivy was mentioning earlier, is this fear that if we are ever less than perfect, we aren't worthy. We aren't worthy of happiness or success. We're not worthy as people. And so we really have that fundamental belief that every single one of us is worthy, that we are enough, and all it takes is that dedication and the grit to keep going in the face of challenges.
I really love the idea of not viewing it as this millennial's broken, we need to fix him or her, but viewing the millennial as a person who has this great potential. I mean, just the way you view a person can really change how you're able to basically train that person or instruct that person or empower that person. One of the things we were talking about earlier, though, was you said that you guys wish you were millionaires right away because you're putting in all this work. And I feel like that's a rough patch people hit where I feel like all rough patches are based on you putting in all of this work, but not getting the results you deserve. So how can entrepreneurs cope with the rough patches that they deal with?
Well, I think that, the first piece of that is really knowing and accepting that there are going to be rough patches, and that doesn't mean that you are doing anything wrong or that you're not on the right path. And, one thing that I've found in doing this work is that when you start moving toward fulfillment or you start moving toward a dream that you really care about, that potential for heartbreak becomes a real thing, right? Because you love this thing and you want it to manifest. And so when there are challenges, you can feel really attached to that and can come get to a place where you're feeling really down on yourself or not able to move forward. So I think really the key is to what I call creating a foundation of recovery, meaning that that whenever those challenges come up or whenever you have dips, that you can handle that it's going to be okay. The orientation isn't, I'm going to make sure I never have challenges or that I'm perfect and I never fail, but it's knowing that when I fail, I know that I'll be able to get back up again or that I'll learn from that experience. And so, creating that foundation of recovery can look different for everyone, but I feel like, self-care, making sure that you are being compassionate and honest with yourself and loving yourself and getting a massage or, that sort of thing. Having community or a tribe that can help you when you're in those low moments that that you can go to them. And even things like exercise, regularly exercising, which, I didn't used to be a big supporter of because I was resistant. But I tell you, for me, if I am really taking care of myself, then I notice that those dips are not as low.
Exercise has definitely helped me out a lot also. I mean, the moment I started, I just felt like my productivity skyrocketed. At first, I thought if I spend an hour exercising, that's an hour that I cannot be working, but it just helps you out so much to be doing that. And it definitely helps with coping with those rough patches. And as I was doing some research on you guys, on the coaching page you offer at Motivational Millennial, there's a picture with the quote, "Our dreams often require us to be even bigger than we already are. The bigger the dream, the more we have to grow to achieve it." How do we grow more so our capabilities can match up with the dreams that we set for ourselves?
Well, so I really appreciate you pulling that out because that's totally my quote, and it makes me feel so special to be like, oh, there's this quote on this page. It's mine. So, really a great way to answer that, I would say, is around this quote, everything that you've ever wanted is on the other side of fear. And so when I think of moving toward the other side of fear, you're really stretching yourself, you're pushing your range of what you think that you're capable of achieving. So, for example, if you have a lot of fear around public speaking or talking about yourself to others, but you're so passionate about the work that you're doing that you know that in order for people to buy this thing, you have to talk to people. Your passion is drawing you to move past that like fear barrier. And then when you get across that fear barrier, you have grown, you are on the other side of fear. You've moved past where your stretching point is, and you're suddenly bigger, and you're suddenly able to hold more and handle more. So for me, it's about moving, not thinking that being afraid or being scared or uncertain is an indicator of a direction you don't need to be going. In fact, I think for me, I use it as an indicator of that's the direction I need to go in. This is telling me that this is my edge. And when I go over that edge, I'm going to be really proud of myself and impressed by that growth.
I really love that idea of conquering your fears and also going in the direction of things that may seem intimidating or scary, but they're going to help you out in the long run. And I know that part of having this attitude towards growth and goals is to basically have an environment in which helps you to have that mindset. I mean, depending on the environment, you could be really happy, really sad, dedicated, or any type of attitude. So how do you create an environment that helps you succeed?
I'm a huge believer in decision-making in advance because we are truly creatures of habit, and every day we mostly do the same types of things in the same types of way that we've done them in the past. And so if you can decide in advance what you want certain interactions to look like or certain activities to look like, then you are so much better prepared to set up a life that you want and a career that you are excited about that doesn't feel stressful every day because you're like, oh, I don't know what to do here. Oh, I have to make a decision here. And I'll give you two really specific examples. The first one is about breakfast. So I have a 20-minute breakfast 20 to 30 minute breakfast plan. If I have 20 to 30 minutes to eat breakfast in the morning, I know I can fix eggs and spinach and almonds and carrots and grapes and blueberries, and it is going to be an amazing breakfast that just gets me rolling, and I'm so excited. I eat the same thing every day. I'm really boring in that sense, but it's because I've made the decision in advance. This is what happens when I have time for breakfast. If I only have 5 minutes for breakfast, my default breakfast decision plan is Fruity Loops with marshmallows. And that's just because I don't have a better solution right now for when I only have 5 minutes. So this morning I only had 5 minutes, which means I went to my default, which was Fruity Loops with marshmallows. And so that showed me was I need to have a better default. And that's just a breakfast example, but the same thing happens in business. We have been doing a major motivational speaking marketing campaign to schools across the country, and it has been so effective because I know every single step of the way. If school reaches out, here's the information we send them. If they have a question, here's the answer. Here's the process when they say yes. Here's the follow-up. And so there are no questions or no decisions that I have to make at any stage because I've already made those decisions in advance.
And, for me, systems are really important, but also I think the first thing that came to mind for me is the self-care, which I talked a little bit about. And I think that that's really important to create an environment to succeed. But I also think in our particular situation, having a business partner, communication is a really important environment for us to succeed because, we've got to learn what kind of support the other person needs. We've got to learn and be honest about our own strengths and our own areas for growth, and so we have had to really be open and honest and talk about that. Otherwise, this partnership wouldn't have lasted for 3.5 years now that it's been going and grown more effective over time. It's just been us hunkering down and taking time to actually invest in that. And I think it's really important, when you're working with a team or when you're working with somebody who is a partner on a certain program, if you only work by yourself, but it's just communication is so important. And that looks like being comfortable sharing what you're experiencing and what your needs are, but also being receptive to that and creating space for that as well from others.
I definitely agree that communication is something very essential, and systems are also going to really create that strong environment for you. I mean, if it's like, if A happens, I do B, and that's automatic, you're going to have such a bias towards action, and that bias towards action is going to be very valuable. But regardless of how much action you take, or how many systems, or how strong your communication is, challenges are going to come. So if a business challenge comes your way, how do you respond to it? So like, what would be your game plan?
Well, I think it is really important to have a game plan, and I actually have a couple mantras I like to go to because, as I said earlier, if you've made the decision in advance, it's so much easier and less stressful. So when those challenges do arise, I already know how I'm going to respond. And so the first one of those mantras is problems are opportunities. So I look at it as, what is good about this quote unquote problem or challenge, and how can this be helpful? Either how can we use it to our advantage, or just how can this help us grow? You know, if something is taking longer than we would like, how can this be a good example of giving us an opportunity to practice patience? Or maybe you can also look at it, if you're feeling particularly Oprah about it, as the universe is doing this for me, not to me. And that distinction is really important because so often it can be easy to sink into that victim mindset and say, oh, why is this happening to me? You know, I can't believe that this thing that I have no control over happened. And if we say, what if this is a gift? What if it's keeping something really even more negative out of my life? Or what if this is protecting me? Or what if this is helping me grow stronger and more resilient to face an even bigger challenge in the future? So one of the important things we like to say is there's the situation and the story. The situation is the facts of whatever happened, right? Whatever this challenge is, what are the facts, not what does it mean? Because that's the story. Because when you look at just the facts, sometimes things aren't that bad, you know? It's going to take you 5 minutes later to get home, or something's not going to come through till the next month, or something's not going to happen at all. If we just look at that's a fact, then it's a lot easier to deal with than it meaning, oh my gosh, nobody cares about me, or I'm going to fail, or this is never going to work out, or I'm terrible at this. It can be really easy to buy into that story, but if we just focus on the situation, we're a lot more empowered, and often challenges that seem huge are actually much more manageable.
I definitely believe that challenges are much smaller than we actually think, because we could view this simple challenge and think it's the biggest thing we've ever faced, you know, mainly in part because we haven't solved it yet. And I believe this mindset perfectly slides into a survey done by Bentley University in 2014, where 67% of millennials wanted to start a business someday, but only 2% of millennials were actually self-employed. And I know part of it is because they see this ginormous challenge. They think it's ginormous, but it's really smaller. So how can more millennials be like the 2%?
Well, I mean, really, I feel like the key is partially what you just said. I think, millennials often have this desire to do meaningful work, desire to have an impact. They want to be able to work for themselves so that they can create the schedule that they want and have freedom. And freedom looks different for everyone, but that's a common thing. But what happens is, there is that initial challenge of taking the leap in the first place to become self-employed and start that journey. But then there's the grit and the perseverance that needs to come in to keep going once you've started. And when I say keep going, it's not just don't quit and go back to whatever, job and give up on your dream entirely, but it's also having perseverance to give your idea or give your program or give your business enough time to be successful. Because I think one of the things, and this is oftentimes for all entrepreneurs, we get that like shiny object syndrome, and we create something and then it may not land immediately, and we're like, oh, well, let's do this next thing. Let's create this new thing, over and over again, rather than, taking the time to really nurture that idea or that passion and figuring out the ways to market it better or structure it a little bit better so that it does land. So there's some ideas around that grit and perseverance.
Yeah, and the other thing that happens a lot is self-doubt comes into play, and millennials don't take that leap to become the 2% because they think, I'm not ready, I'm not qualified, I'm not good enough for whatever reason, I'm not attractive enough, I'm not experienced enough. And one of the things I say a lot in my speeches and also in my individual work with people is let them tell you no. Whoever them is, right? The company you want to apply for, the admissions committee for that program you want to be in, or even just people you think are going to be your critics out there, because they are going to exist. But you know what? We stop ourselves much more frequently than other people ever stop us. And so my encouragement is just let them tell you no.
I love that idea of even if you feel like you don't have a shot at doing it, just do it anyway and let them say it, because I feel like people tend to shortchange themselves intentionally, and I don't know why. It's probably one of these human psychology things, but we do tend to shortchange ourselves a lot, and I feel like that's something that we all need to personally strive towards improving. And speaking of improving, one of the things you two do very well is that you continue to develop as successful entrepreneurs. So I'm wondering, how do you continue to develop your entrepreneurial skills?
Well, you really hit on something there, Mark, which is the fear that we all feel. And how I continue to develop as an entrepreneur is by saying yes to opportunities that feel outside of my comfort zone, because I know if I say yes to them, I'll be forced to grow to meet them. And so examples of this would be, I was invited to audition for America's Got Talent, and I had never even dreamed about performing for 3,000 people, let alone in Madison Square Garden. But I said yes, and it forced me to develop the confidence and the courage to get up on stage in front of those 3,000 people and the 4 celebrity judges and actually do a freestyle rap, totally improvised, live about a random audience member. So that was definitely a development opportunity for sure.
Yeah, and on my end, it's interesting because I have found that the way that I have grown the most as an entrepreneur and actually become better at business really has been less about learning more about how to have a great niche or, specific marketing things or specific skills or hard skills even, but it's been more about understanding and loving myself so that I can be the most authentic and vulnerable version of myself. So I don't have to feel like when I'm talking to people about the work that I do and the way that I can support them, that I'm trying to be anything other than who I am. So it's been so beneficial for me to do that internal work and realize this is who I am, this is who I want to be for the world. And then I found that I'm getting, more clients and more business because I'm just meeting the world with who I am, and then people are attracted to that. So that's actually been one of the ways I've developed as an entrepreneur.
I love that idea of just being who you are. I feel like that's something a lot of people struggle with. Millennials also in particular, as they try and find their own identity, and people are saying, go get the job where you make a lot of money, but it may be something that you hate. So you lose that ability to express who you are. So I definitely find that very insightful. And we were talking about challenges earlier about what the game plan is for them. And I was wondering, what is a big challenge that you have faced in your lives and how did you overcome it?
So it's funny because when I was thinking about answering this question, the first thing that came to my mind was being born, and it's so dramatic. I was like, oh, being born is a big challenge. And it's so dramatic sounding, but like the human condition, there's a lot of fear and suffering and stuff going on, but really it was about I was raised in my family, which a lot of us have experienced, the victim mindset, meaning things I guess like Blake was talking about earlier, that things are happening to us rather than for us. And when you have the mindset of things happening to you, you don't have the sense of empowerment to feel like you can change it, or to have your voice heard and say, actually, could this happen, or anything like that. So I don't know, you feel really diminished. And I think that overall, I don't even know, like seeping, that's not the right word. Marinating is the right word. Marinating in a family with pretty prevalent victim mindset was a big challenge to overcome once I got into my 20s and later starting to be seeing myself as a business person and seeing myself as an entrepreneur and really owning that, because you can't feel disempowered and have a successful business at the same time, because you have to take risks. You have to get out there, put yourself out there, feel like you're capable of overcoming challenges that come your way, feel like you can handle those things, like I said, creating that foundation of recovery. And so for me, that was a challenge that was sort of ongoing, and then also took time, like years, to really overcome, actually.
Yeah, and I'd say for me, perfectionism was a really big challenge, especially in high school. I felt that I needed to be liked by everyone all the time, and I needed to have the perfect grades. And that really led to severe depression in high school. But then later in life, this perfectionism, it caused this cycle of procrastination, which I'm sure a lot of your listeners can probably relate to, of you think there's this thing that you want to do or you need to do, and you think about it and you're like, oh gosh, that's the most important thing I need to do. And so I'll go watch Netflix for 5 hours, or so I'll go clean every surface that I can find, or whatever your distraction, Facebook or Twitter, Instagram. And so it was really crippling in a way, because I almost quit my PhD. I did a PhD on hip hop and global youth cultures, and I was incredibly thankful to receive a scholarship that brought me over to England to allow me to do this master's and the dissertation. And I was almost done with the writing, and I just felt so stuck, and like it had to be perfect. And I also felt the shame and guilt that I had this incredible privilege to be able to study the thing I love. I mean, how many people in the world could even say that they got a chance to do that, let alone have someone else pay for it? And so that shame cycle was really painful, and I almost quit. And I talked to my PhD supervisor, and she said, "What will it take to finish this?" And I said, "I just have to write a conclusion." But she said, no, like, what will make you excited to finish this? And I was like, I mean, maybe I could actually do a hip hop album as part of the dissertation. And she was like, do it. I'll make it happen on my end. And so I was able to submit a PhD hip hop album as part of my dissertation. It was called Scholar. And on May 31st, 2011, I launched the album and submitted my dissertation and became a doctor.
Congratulations on that really awesome story. That is definitely one way of many to launch an album. So I love that you were able to stick out with that ambitious. I mean, I've heard horror stories about having to write those types of essays, but shifting gears here, both of you have learned a lot of great lessons throughout your journeys, apart from each other and together for Motivational Millennial. What is the best lesson that each of you have learned on your journey?
For me, it's really the story that we tell ourselves is the most powerful thing. And what I mean by the story is the story about what things mean when things happen to us. Does it mean only the thing that's disempowering, or could it mean something else? And so that's a question that I think can be really helpful sometimes, is what else could this mean? And the other kind of stories we tell ourselves are stories about who we are and what we're capable of. Because if you tell yourself, I can achieve this huge goal, then you'll take action over and over again until you figure out ways to get closer to that goal. But if you tell yourself, someone like me could never achieve that goal, then you won't even start and you won't even try. And that's
the most surefire way to not achieve the goal?
I think the biggest, or I guess best lesson that I have learned is trust yourself. So for me to trust myself, for others to trust themselves. And I think this is really important and valuable in running a business, because what we can do when we have an idea, or we have a project that we're working on, or we have something that we're really passionate about, is we go to other people immediately for some sort of validation of whatever that idea is, and it can be really disempowering. So if we take the time to really get quiet and trust ourselves and think, okay, this is actually, I know this is what I want to do, at least when you move forward, you're experiencing what it's like to trust yourself. And I got some really great advice from a spiritual advisor one time, because one of the things about asking people for help and advice before, I mean, not that there isn't that there isn't value in other people's advice, but I'm saying when you don't listen to or trust yourself at all and let that be like the number one thing, we're doing that in part because we feel like maybe it'll help us not fail or keep us from making mistakes. Because if enough people are like, oh yeah, that's a great idea, then you're like, oh, okay, I feel okay about this, I'm not going to screw up. But sometimes when we're pursuing our passion, we might want to go, let me just, I'll give you a specific example so it's more interesting and not as abstract. When I graduated from undergrad, I was just like not ready to do a traditional career. Turns out I was never ready to do a traditional career, but at the time I thought, okay, I need to take a break. And I was like, I'm going to go on a road trip with just me in my tiny car with my dog. My boyfriend at the time literally removed the passenger seat because my car was that small. He removed the passenger seat so that like my dog could have that space and I could like live in my car for like 6 weeks and drive all around the western half of the US. I'm from Kansas originally. People were like, this is crazy. What are you doing? This is like so weird of you. Especially family members were like worried I'm going to end up on the road somewhere. But ultimately, I trusted myself. I knew that I wasn't making a mistake. I knew that that's what I needed. And what it did was it helped me deepen the trust that I had in myself, because if I wanted to stop on the side of the road and eat somewhere, I did it. I didn't have to ask anybody else. I just did it. And it gave me a whole new sense of confidence and trust in myself, even though from the outside perspective, people were like, this is really crazy. So that's really what I mean by how this applies to being an entrepreneur, is because there are going to be times when you feel strongly pulled towards something and people around you are not going to see that same vision. And so knowing that your true compass is the most important thing has been the most valuable thing for me.
I love setting a vision and being clear on it, even when others may have differing opinions about where do you want to go. It's as if they can direct you as to where to go. I mean, I feel like people give way too much precedence to someone who says, okay, you should do X, Y, Z. And they're like, okay, I'll do X, Y, Z. So thank you for bringing that point up for the lesson that you learned. And one question I'd like to ask, I've been asking this question a lot lately because I consume books like 5-year-olds consume ice cream scoops.
Nice.
So what are 3 great books you can think of right now?
So going from our shared mental library, I'd say Eckhart Tolle's The Power of Now, which is just a brilliant way to think about how we exist in the world, and that voice in the back of our heads that feels like it's us, but it's not actually us. We are a presence. And once we make that distinction, all the things that we beat ourselves up about, all the things that we worry about tend to just be that voice, and we can separate that voice from ourselves. Another book that we love is Daring Greatly by Brené Brown. We actually did a motivational rap series where for 52 weeks, for an entire year, we wrote a blog post about some kind of personal development challenge that we or people we know have faced. And we wrote a rap about it. And then we would go to various places in the San Francisco Bay Area where we're based, and Ivy would film and I would do the rap. And Brene Brown actually found one of those raps that we did about daring greatly and sent out a very nice note to all of her followers. And that was one of those moments where someone who's really impacted us dramatically was actually praising the work we were doing. And so I feel like it came full circle, but that is a really transformative book. And the other one, in a slightly more fiction-based variety, is Mistborn, Mistborn, by Brandon Sanderson. And Brandon Sanderson is my favorite fantasy author, contemporary fantasy author. And it is brilliant, woman protagonist, just so clever with characterization. And you'll love this, Mark, being in the entrepreneurial space. There's literally a scene in Mistborn where they're having a strategic brainstorming session, like on a chalkboard in the middle of the book. And, because it's one of these things where they're all, most fantasy books, like there's magic and they're invading places, but so rarely are they like, okay, we're going to plan a siege. Now, what kind of considerations do we need to have? And they're like writing all these things up and considering the different options. So
yeah, we are big fantasy sci-fi book lovers over here.
Yeah, so
and it's like a big, I think one thing to say about that is that it's so important that we're reading things that we really love and aren't judging that, right? Like, because sometimes I think to myself, okay, I've got to be reading really serious personal development stuff, and it's the only thing I can be reading. But I found that when I just let myself read what I love, like I consume books like ice cream cones too.
So those are the recommendations for both of you, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next question, which you guys, Blake and Ivy, you two get to share one question that we need to be asking ourselves more often.
The first question that came to mind for me is, what do I need in this moment? And I think that's important for all of us because we often feel like thinking about or considering our needs and then actually having them met is selfish. It's so much easier for us to help other people and to give to other people, but we feel really uncomfortable with receiving. And that's so interesting too, because when we give, we feel so good and so happy. And so when we ask ourselves what we need and ask someone for support, we're providing that person with the opportunity to get that warm, fuzzy feeling of getting to help us, like they get to give to you and then you get to have your needs met, and everybody just feels so much better than they would be otherwise. So I think that's something that could be really helpful for people to answer or ask more often and answer, I suppose.
Yes.
That's the other part of it.
Two-part question. That's right. Yeah, and I'd say for me, it's the Oprah quote, what if this is happening for me, not to me? And I feel like it's kind of become cliche just because there is Facebook and people share motivational quotes a lot, but it's one of those questions that I've started to use a lot recently, and it has transformed the actions I take and the results I get. And that's how I measure whether a question is really helping, because if it's actually changing my reality, then I know that it's having an impact, that it's positive. And it's an empowering question versus the kind of questions that say, who am I to do this? I'm not, why should I even try? Do you think this person's going to think I'm stupid or not going to like me or whatever? And Tony Robbins is a big believer in the questions we ask ourselves. And I've found more and more on this entrepreneurial journey that that's true. So, Mark, I love this question. Thank you for asking that.
My pleasure. Thank you for taking the time to come up with those great questions and for sharing all of your insights throughout this episode. Before you go, I invite the two of you to share where Breakthrough Success listeners can find you on the web.
So we are present on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. It's Motivational Millennial is present there. And then also you can find us individually. I think most of Blake's stuff is Blake Brandes or Dr. Blake Brandes, and mine is usually LaClair, like iPad, like our iMac. But we do want to give your listeners a free gift. So you can go to motivationalmillennial.com/free gift, and you can get a free personal development e-guide that's called Motivating Your Millennial Mind. And what it does is it lays out 4 of the common limiting beliefs and mindsets that we hold as millennials. And then there are a couple of tools and perspectives and some activities in there to help you overcome what those limiting mindsets are. And again, that's Motivational Millennial, and millennial spelled MILLENNIAL. And you can also check out the Motivational Millennial Podcast. You can find previous episodes on the website or through any, regular service. But I just want to note that, Mark, you're going to be on the podcast later on in our next season too. So I just want to tell your audience, and they know that you're going to be on there, and they can hear more about you from a different perspective later.
I look forward to being on your podcast as well. And Breakthrough Success listeners, if you want to get that resource, not only will you be able to visit the link that Blake and Ivy have so generously given, but you can also view the show notes for this episode in case you've got to take notes at markguberti.com/E44. Blake and Ivy, it was such a pleasure to have you on the Breakthrough Success podcast. Thank you for sharing your insights with us today.
Well, thank you for bringing breakthrough success to so many people, Mark. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
To never miss an episode, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast on whatever player you are using. If you are a regular listener and haven't done so already, I would greatly appreciate it if you could give this podcast a review or a rating. 2 ways you could do this are through markguberti.com/iTunes or markguberti.com/Stitcher. That ends this episode. Don't forget, dream big, achieve greatness, and unlock your potential today. How does over 100 retweets per day sound to you? My free ebook, 27 Ways to Get More Retweets on Twitter, has you covered. I use the methods within this ebook to get over 10,000 retweets every single quarter. To learn more and get access to this free resource, visit markguberti.com/retweet. This podcast is a production done by Mark Guberti. For more insights, head on over to markguberti.com.